Hi, I'm CJ and this is my RC channel.
It helps to lay things out and get things organized. There's a bag that has these various pieces. These are the diff cases. These are the gears for the diff. These are the pinions. And in that is also this little plastic washer or spacer that is right here in your drawings in step number 1. When you open the bag that contains these pieces, go ahead and just lay them out. They're all identical. Basically, you have an out drive from the diff, and then you have an out drive to the wheel. And you're going to have a dog bone in between, and they are all the same size. Depending on your plans, you may see references to a long wheelbase or a wider rear track. That does not apply to this kit. If you're building a different TT01 vehicle than the truck, it may apply and the correct parts will be in your kit. They don't provide additional items that aren't necessary. In other words, the wider wheelbase components and the long wheelbase rear arms are not included in this kit. So right off the bat, you're going to find these two items in this package here, and they are, different from each other. They are part of the drive system. The one with the hole in it is going to go to the rear, and that's the first piece we need. So you're going to open the package A, and you're going to find several bags of parts. Go ahead and pull out one of these pins. There's several of them. And you're gonna it's gonna go in here. Now, I can't just leave it in here because it's gonna fall out. So I'm just gonna set it down for a moment while I show you the other things you're gonna need here, okay? You need this gear that has these 4 pieces, and that is going to face towards the front. So this is the rear of the car here. It's going to end up going into this slot here. Now, before we insert that pin, we're going to put on the bearing and the spacer. Now, the spacer is very loose, because it's going to end up sliding over the teeth here. It's going to snap on. So go ahead and, even if you're using the bearings, you might as well apply grease, because these items may rub up against each other, and there's no need to have unnecessary wear. You only need it on one side, because this piece right here, you're going to put a little bit of grease on those 4 pins, but once this snaps in place, it's not going to move. So it's really not necessary, but it can't possibly hurt. So what I'm going to do is, holding this level so the pin stays in place, I'm going to lower the gear in to place and then slide this axle in. As you can see, the pin just got captured, and then the plastic spacer snapped on, and our bearing drops into place. And that's that. Next, we're going to put in the drive shaft, and we're going to insert this piece here. There's no bearing or anything that goes on. Those will come in from behind later in the assembly, but this piece needs to be kind of snapped into place. So we're going to put a, oops, too much. I was going to say a generous amount of grease, but not overly large. And see, this doesn't slide right in, so you kind of need to flex the drive shaft, kind of bend it a little bit. It's plastic, so it's going to slide right back into place. It does take a little effort. Now this is going to be constantly in motion, so adding a little extra grease is not going to hurt it, but you definitely need a decent amount in there. Don't be shy about putting a decent amount of grease into those sockets. And as you can see, you can just wipe off any excess. So the next step is to add these two pins, B8 and B8. They go here and here. These are going to hold down the battery retention strap. Okay. Here is one of them. It's good to have a good set of cutters. This hole is has a flat section to it, because these also have a flat section. And as you can see, they just slide in. Do them one at a time, because you're going to be screwing them in from below. And you're going to need two of the 3x10mm screws that are a countersunk Phillips head. Now, as I mentioned, they give you several packages in A. One of them has a set of diff gears in it, and it's probably best just to go ahead and open both of the ones that have the hardware and pour them into a small tray. As you can see, I've got several trays. I have a couple more off cam, and it's a good way to keep things organized. So we are looking for a pair of screws that look like this, and you can just hold them next to the plans and confirm that you have the right size. If you have a good set of calipers, you can measure them to be 100% sure. And I should get my tools out in advance here. These are probably gonna, yeah, that's the right one. Just snug these down. You don't need to over tighten them, and you certainly don't want to strip them. Okay, we're on to step 3. So, first thing you want to do is find the grub screw. That's what a grub screw is. and you want to get the gear. Now this comes with an Allen wrench, but I'm going to go ahead and use one of my own. And all you need to do is start it. We're going to need this cardboard washer. It's basically a mount. I think it's like a heat shield for the motor mount, which is also made of plastic like the rest of the kit. So now I need the motor. And just pull this rubber hose that they have on here. It's just to protect the outdrive there. So let's see. First thing we're going to do is go ahead and position this on the can so that the holes line up. Like that. And then we need to get our motor mount. Which is in this package. Okay, now we need a specific amount of spacing here. We need 15 millimeters from the can to the outer edge of the drive gear. And this is where even a cheap pair of calipers comes in handy. This would be a cheap pair of calipers. So I'm just gonna set that for 15 millimeters. And I'm going to go ahead and slide the gear on. And just snug the grub screw down a little bit so I can still move it, but at this point it's turning the motor because there's a flat spot on the outdrive that you want to make sure you're in contact with. And you kind of got to do this by eye because you can't get the calipers all the way in there. That looks about right. You want to snug that down. Don't strip it or break it. And both are possible, so use care. So now the mounting position. If you look here, you can see that the different holes here give you a different position, and what that does is provide the correct spacing to the drive gear from the pinion gear. And we have a 19 tooth pinion, and that is, you can't change that. You have to run the 19 tooth in this class, so you're going to be using this line, which is top and bottom. So now we need the two screws, or they're more like a bolt. They don't have they don't self-tap. It's not a coarse thread, it's a fine thread. And there's only two of them, so it's fairly easy to pick them out. They look like that. go ahead and get one started. Don't tighten it down. That makes it easier to get the next one started. Okay, now you're going to lower the motor into place, the flat side down, into the grooves that are right here and right here. And it just snaps in. As you can see, we have a nice, there's just a little bit of gear lash, which is what we need and want. So now we have to anchor the motor. Let's see, that part is D10. And you should be able to figure out the letter of these pieces by looking on the main sheet. So, okay, there we go, D. So that means this is our piece here. There is number 10, so D10. And there we go. So we only use some of the holes right now, and we need 3x10s. And we need 4 of them. Now, never take it for granted that you've got the right screw. There are a lot of screws that are very similar. You're going to see a lot of these, the 310s, but there's also some 312s and a couple that are longer, so you want the right screw for the right spot. So our first screw is the outermost hole right here. Now, I'm not going to tighten them all completely, and also this is probably time to switch to the other screwdriver. I'm just snugging them. I'll give them all a tightening in a minute. Okay, that is steps 3 and 4. So, let's just bend that down. Okay, now it is time for our first diff. And this is our differential gear. And we're going to need this and this. Now, these are not overly tricky. So, first step, we have these two gears, and as you can see, they have a kind of a slotted hole. That is because they are going to turn these out drives like that. So, first thing you want to do is cover the backside of this gear with some grease. Oh yeah, and I shouldn't be using this grease. I should be using the anti-wear grease for this step. You can use the regular grease in pretty much any other place that it calls for grease. Now, the instructions don't specify the anti-wear grease, but it is a Tamiya product, and everybody that is experienced at this that I have talked to all say you need to use the AW grease. And it is some thick, snotty stuff. You see, it's kind of got a metallic look to it. So, an X-Acto knife works well for this. I'm just trying to get it up the sides here. There are no internal bearings, so that's another reason to make sure that you use enough grease there and you're using the right grease, because there's nothing else that is preventing that from just wrecking itself. And that's also one of the things that I purchased as a spare. I believe it was about $4 or $5. I got an extra gear set. I only got one of them. It's unlikely that I'm going to blow a diff anyway, but in the possibility that one of them fails, I wanted to have some spares on hand. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put some grease on the insides of these little gears here. And we need grease on the back side. I'm using this fairly sparingly. You can always add more to the gears themselves before you close this up. making sure that I get that grease I put inside the gear all over the rotator shaft. Just trying to make sure that that grease gets all the way down the rotator shaft, and there's lots of it in there, and it's okay. Now your diff housing has 3 square cuts in it. Those are where your drive shafts are going to go into for the centerpiece, for the star, if you want to call it that. So there they are, now in place. So there, you see how they're going to rub up against there, or can. That's why you're making sure to put some grease on the back side there. Definitely keep some paper towels handy. Now, we want to make sure that we get a generous amount of grease into these gears. I didn't put any on the grease on the bearing on the lower gear because I'm going to coat it this way. First, I'm going to take a good quantity of this grease. Smear it onto those gears. Now I can take one of these out drives and rotate from below, and you can hear that grease just getting all in there. So now I can take some more of this grease. Now I'll put a little more on these gears, this gear up here. I'm not going to try to cover every tooth because it's all going to get spread around. Now I'm going to do the back side. Now these little buckets of grease, you can also get this grease in a tube, and I highly recommend that. I have one in my toolbox. I'm just using these little cups because I have them. So, and I can drop that into place. And now it's time for the gear. And just because I'm going to put a little extra grease right in here. So you want to line up these 3 holes with the holes on the gear. And this caps off the differential. And just to make sure that I'm lined up there. Yep. Okay. So now we need the 3 very small screws to seal up this diff, or as sealed as it gets. These, remember, this is not a differential that seals. If you put in too much grease, it's just going to leak out. There is no gasket. And just to show you up close, that's what they look like. switch back to the small screwdriver. And again, I'm not going to bottom out that screw until I've got the other two started. Remember, don't over tighten. You can definitely strip this out. It's a very small screw. And it could pull the threads right out. And then you'll have to order parts before you can use it. So, just to test, go ahead and put an out drive in either side, and you should get counter rotation. And it should have a decent amount of resistance because that grease is very thick, so you're going to get a good solid rotation, but it's not going to be easy. I mean, it's not going to hurt your fingers to turn it, but you can definitely feel the resistance, and that's what you're looking for. So there is our differential done. Step number 5 complete. In case you're curious, this is the bearings that I'm using. As you can see, it is specific to the vehicle, not just the TT01 chassis. I've used several sets of fast eddy bearings before and never had any problems with them. And I was just looking to see if there's a specific part number on here, but I'm not seeing one. In any event, I searched these up on Amazon, and I think they were around $70. So, not cheap, but hopefully worth it. Okay, so now it's time to put on this brace, which is A5, and then we have this shock tower mount, which is A10. And then we have the back of our differential case, and that is a 9. Now, they don't specify any screws for these two. When I built my first one, I put in a pair of the 3x10s. Excuse me for pausing there. I put in a pair of these just as placeholders. Another piece is going to go on top of this and get screwed down with a longer screw. So using a pair of these as temporaries is just fine. And as I said, I've already done that once and not had a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and get these two started. And the interesting thing about this this process here is that we are putting on the rear swing arms at the same time. Now you will notice that some of these plastic parts, the A parts in particular, is a much harder and thus more brittle plastic than the B parts. The B parts is a softer, more rubbery plastic. And you kind of have to do this all at one time. Now, this is the long wheelbase. If you look in the instructions, you will see that they reference a B4 and a B14 short wheelbase, those are not included. It would be a different model that would get those. Probably something like a buggy or a short two-wheel, a short car, like a little two-door, like a little Fiat or something like that, or that size vehicle, that style, that would need the shorter wheelbase. So, okay, to put this together, first we need one of our bearings, or if you don't have the bearings, a bushing. And I cannot emphasize how much I recommend you getting the bearings over the bushings, and you just slide it in like that. It doesn't like go into a particular socket or anything. It doesn't have to be pressed in. So you'll notice it's just flush with the base here. It's got a retainer. Okay, then we're going to take our diff and we're going to put on our bearings. Now they show putting grease on the bearings, but those are for bushings, not bearings. Likewise, they show grease being put on the drive, and we do not want that because, again, we have a bearing in there. So go ahead and just slide these two bearings on like that. Now we want to grease this gear. And again, it's going to spread around with the pinion gear, so we don't need to go overboard, but we definitely want to put a decent amount on. I'm not going to cover the whole thing because, again, this is going to spread around once it rotates more than a few times. And we just slide that in. Now I can, oh yeah, I haven't put in my gear yet. Excuse me. One pinion gear, and there's nothing to retain this. It just sits in there. It has a, as you can see, it's shaped to key onto the rear drive shaft here. And that's all there is to it. Just give it a little, just press it on and it just snugs into place. And then once this is in place, I'm going to go ahead and rotate it around a few times. And if you watch the gear now, you will see that there is grease on every tooth. It just naturally spreads itself around. Now, what you want to do is prop this up a little bit. I know what I'll use. You probably won't have one of these. It's just a heavy weight. You might try a battery pack. So this is just to keep the differential from falling out. And you want to make sure that you have these arms positioned properly. Pay attention to the drawing, and it's fairly obvious. The lower ones have the angle facing rearward, And the upper ones have this little jog here facing rearwards. Hey, honey. You ready for me? Okay, I'll be there in a few minutes. Love you. Bye. So our rear ones, again, have that little jog facing backwards. And, excuse me, this faces up, and these little feet there face down. So all we got to do is get our parts started. Oh, and I didn't grease these. Okay, I have to go pick my wife up at the office, and I'm not going to do this right now. I'll do this when I return. Okay, so I've got this propped up, and now it's time to put the A-arms in their correct orientations. So the rear ones, the bottom ones, excuse me, angle backward like this, not like that. And the top ones have the little jog toward the rear. Now, it calls for grease for these holes where these items rotate, and you can use, I wouldn't use the AW grease. It's too expensive and there's too little of it. I would just use the regular grease if you're going to go in that direction. I am not. I'm using a different type of grease. This is a white grease. It's a powder, and it's designed for RC models and various types of hobbying, and it's supposed to cling. And because it's dry, it's not going to attract dirt, and then that dirt become an irritant, chafing. If you take grease and you add enough particulate to it, it basically, you know, becomes counterproductive, and you're grinding at the plastic. So I'm going to give this stuff a try, and may have to, I've never used this before, and because it's a powder, it kind of applies a little differently. It does have a sticky feel to it when you have enough of it on your finger. Sorry, I wasn't doing that in the camera view. I'm trying to split the difference between being close up and being close enough that you can see what's going on. If I pull back too far, everything is black plastic and you don't see much detail. So I'm doing what I can for you. Now I'm going to cover these holes and try adding a little bit from this side as well. So having this at an angle allows you to more easily align these arms. So there, you want to put this in the side where there's two little barrels sticking out. Those are going to plug into the two larger holes here. And if you just try one side or the other, you'll see what I mean. It goes in nice and easy. Interestingly enough, there's no screws on the bottom. You're going to be looking for them, but they're not there. They kind of clip into the bumper. So that will that becomes obvious later. I remember the first time I assembled one of these TT01 chassis, wondering how am I supposed to attach, you know, how come this thing doesn't have another set of bolts at the bottom? But between the three top ones, and these are very difficult to screw in. The plastic is very hard, and you want to make sure that it's in. Just jiggle the arm there, and if it has any movement, you haven't tightened it enough. That that dry white lube really does stick to everything. I don't imagine it takes an awful lot. And the fact that it's, you know, totally dry means that it's not going to attract dirt and grime off the track. See, you can see there's a little bit of a gap here, but once the bracket goes on that's over here, these two pieces are held together. So the case is solid, but it's not leak proof. Again, don't forget that. You don't need to fill up those diffs. Okay, so now it is time for the A6s. And again, A is that very, not brittle, but it is a much harder plastic, and I just use my cutters to snip these off. If you come at this with from the right direction with the cutters, there's very little that you need to do. Okay, that's one of my fronts. I'm going to put that in there. And those are for later. Okay, so we need 2 of these out drives, and we're going to need some bearings, as opposed to bushings. And since we're using bearings, There is no need for any grease or lube at these steps. So we're just gonna press a bearing in that side, press a bearing in from this side, and a good way to do the inner ones if it's hard to get your finger in there is just slide one of the drives through and press down on it, and that'll get the bearing seated. Hopefully you can see that. I'm just going to do this same thing right from the get-go. There we go. And we're going to need a couple of dog bones in just a moment. And we need a couple of our out drives that are going to plug into the diff. Now, the only place we need grease here is in these cups, and this is someplace I'd rather do occasional cleanup and use a liquid grease. Just getting a look at the shaping in there. I'm going to go ahead and apply some grease to the dog bone itself. Instead of the inside of the cup. Just kind of rotate it around. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other end of the dog bone. While holding this assembly together, and just kind of rotate it around a bit. Clean off anything extra. It'll probably be easier to do that once this is assembled. Just take a Q-tip and go through for the extra grease. Now that out drive is just going to plug right in. Just rotate it until it starts to seat itself into the diff, and then it slides right in. Okay, so now we need those and the longer ones for the bottom. So a long and a short for one side and a long and a short for the other side. Now, this is another place that they don't actually call for grease here, but it's probably a good idea to put a little bit on here. Even if it's just a teeny bit. Just run over it with your fingers. Get a thin coat on there. And then slide it through. Just twist it on till it's snug. You don't need to over tighten it. There's only enough thread to anchor it in one side and keep it from coming out. But that's one good reason to have a little bit of grease on here, to make sure that it's not going to back itself out from friction. Okay, that's one side done. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and do the other side. It's exactly what I just did. No point in boring you. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click like and please subscribe to my channel.